Just in the interest of time, I'm going to do a very light overview of the Lake Erie algae issue, and then otherwise really just talk about a bit about the Guardian. So there'll probably be a whole pile of questions that will be left unanswered, and I'm certainly happy to just chat with you afterwards, either in the chat box or offline, to discuss those and try to respond to those as much as best as I can. So on that note, I'm just gonna turn off my video and go maximize this presentation. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Canadian Freshwater Alliance, we're a national organization that's about 10 years old, and our focus really is on strengthening citizen voices and participation in protecting our...
I can't actually see the presentation, so we may have to keep it in the smaller... There we go.
And now you can see it.
You can see it.
Well, isn't that curious? Okay. Can you, if you maximize it, can you see it well enough?
It looks good to me. If anybody has any objections, you can let me know in the chat.
Okay.
Works for me. All right, let's go with it.
Well, let's just keep going with it. That's good to know then.
Thanks.
So yes, as I was saying, really focused on building that citizen connection, be it business owners, individuals, recreational users, to helping to safeguard the water. And my focus in the Lake Erie watershed is really Lake Erie, Thames River, Grand River area as well. So speaking to the algae issue briefly, this was the Thames or Antler River, as it's known in Anishinaabe, to the Anishinaabe people, also Deshkan Zibi Antler River. This was the river near Chatham, Kent on September 24th last year. And it actually had never experienced algae blooms until 2017 and now has every single year. So just it's a growing problem. We hear a lot about it in Lake Erie, but it's actually an issue within the watershed. This was Lake Erie last year, and so we were out doing some water sampling with some scientists. And as you can see, again, September, and that's the stuff we're pulling up. Last year's bloom you could actually see from space, so it was quite quite large. The 2015 bloom was the largest on record. 2014, you've probably heard about. That's when Toledo actually lost its source of fresh water, so the water supply actually had to be shut down because of the toxic algae. So that's 400,000 people in Toledo who lost access to their drinking water, as well as residents in Pelee Island. And over on the east end of the lake towards Port Dover, there's also been algae issues there. It's a different type of algae called Cladophora. Impacts the waterways slightly differently, but still a concern. And again, Port Dover regularly has issues where it clogs up its intake to drinking water, and as such, the municipal drinking water actually has to be shut down so that can be cleaned out. Lake Erie's been here before, so this is a cartoon that appeared in a newspaper in 1968, where media were actually declaring the lake dead just because of so much pollution, as well as algae. And at that point, it did get resolved. Citizens came together, and there's an image at the end of this presentation where people are actually out protesting to save Lake Erie. And they did it by putting on regulations for phosphorus in detergents, for making sewage outflows, improving the sewage treatment of plants. And so those are a couple of key areas where they actually, through regulation, cleaned up the lake. The problem now is slightly different. So at this point, it's not so much detergents and stuff that are an issue, it's agricultural runoff. So essentially nutrients that are applied on land that are causing the bloom. So just as, phosphorus helps plants grow on land, it helps plants and algae grow in the water. And so phosphorus and to some extent nitrogen is the issue. And partly what's exacerbating this and why it's an issue, some of the reasons why it's more of an issue now than it was before is certainly there's been land use changes. I think in one of the earlier presentations today, there was discussion around wetlands and the fact that Lake Erie's lost 80% of its wetlands. And so those areas can't sort of hold on to the water that's running off the land. Climate change is an issue. We've got more intense rainfall, snow melts, freeze-thaw cycles, and so all of a sudden any fertilizers that are applied on land and farm fields end up running off just with those severe storm events, and then also warming temperatures, which warms up the water, and just a perfect condition for algae. There's also various ecosystem changes, so everything like some of the zebra mussels and stuff that actually help create a better environment for the algae in terms of helping it grow. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the type of phosphorus now is different. In terms of where phosphorus comes from, big concern for us is sort of the non-point source. So the point source is stuff that's coming out of sewage pipes and stuff. You could kind of pinpoint it and deal with it. So that's your sewage treatment plants, etc. That's about 10% of the issue, 10-15%. Bigger issue now is sort of non-point. That's a lot harder to deal with, right? Because you're dealing with a big wide area and you don't actually have somewhere you can just kind of go and say, okay, we'll deal with this pipe and the water that's coming out here. It's kind of coming from everywhere and you're trying to deal with it. And that's the agricultural land and the urban areas. And so really what's happening is with 75% of the Lake Erie watershed in agriculture, that's a big issue. In terms of how Lake Erie responds to phosphorus, you've got sort of the western basin. If you think of going from Point Pelee west, that's called the Western Basin, and that's where you often get the toxic kind of algae and all those gory photos from. And that really is where the big blooms happen. Occasionally they shift into the Central Basin. Central Basin is kind of where the algae goes to die, and as it decomposes in those waters, it kind of creates dead zones where there's no oxygen, and so therefore fish and wildlife have a hard time living there. There's actually big fish die-off in 2012 as a result of that. And then in the Eastern Basin, as I mentioned earlier, Chlodophora is a bigger issue, so it's a slightly different, it's a different type of algae, but also damaging to wildlife and recreational uses of the water, etc. In terms of why it matters, as I said, it impacts fish, birds, wildlife, everything from botulism that's being caused by the Chlodophora, impeding, Chlodophora kind of clogs up natural habitat for the birds and wildlife. And then you've got the toxic stuff on the west end of the basin that, you've got animals, pets dying from swimming in it, and it's human health issue, impacts our drinking water, and then also has economic impacts. In terms of human health, also human health impacts, this is from the Windsor-Essex County Public Health Unit, just outlining some of the concerns and impacts on human health. So it is a neurotoxin, it is a liver toxin, and so certainly you don't want to be swimming or drinking in the water if it contains toxins. And again, not all algae is going to contain toxins. There's still research going on what conditions make it create the toxins, but essentially it's the toxins in the algae, which isn't always present, but is sometimes present. That's the issue. And I'm just going to whip through these slides because I'm keeping an eye on time here. In terms of solutions, as I said, since agricultural lands are a big concern, there's stuff like doing a better job on placing nutrients on the soil when the crops are actually able to use it. So that's talking about, right time, right place, right product, and right amount, not over applying nutrients, applying them when there's crops in the field so they can actually keep the the nutrients there, and they're not just going to run off. So winter spreading in the fall is and early spring are really bad times, because you're going to get your rain events, your storm events that just going to wash that stuff off. Cover crops. I think someone mentioned that in the chat box, and other BMPs are really important. Restoring buffer strips, so that really helps in terms of keeping soil and fertilizers and giving it somewhere to go when plants can take it up before it hits the ditches and such. And then I think there was also a talk earlier about wetland restoration, and that's a really key point. In terms of municipalities, sorry, I just jumped ahead there. Combined sewer overflows, stormwater management, green infrastructure developments are really important. And then there's different policy tools that municipalities can use to help the issue. And then there's sort of that big provincial federal piece where, you know, both the provincial and federal governments adopted the Lake Erie Action Plan in 2018. And that was the target in that plan is a 40% reduction of phosphorus going into Lake Erie in the western end. And that target, the province actually said they'd hit 20% of that reduction target by 2020. Unfortunately, there's been no updates or reports on that. And so we're just assuming it hasn't been met. And then 40%, both governments have committed to that target for 2025. The interesting thing there, and I'll talk that is sort of the point below there in terms of work plans, those are supposed to be submitted on how they're actually going to implement the plan by February 2019, so February last year. So those are almost 2 years overdue. And so that's a concern, and we've got a petition going on that, because it's fine to have a plan, but if you're not actually going to outline how you're implementing it and monitoring it and knowing if you're achieving the targets, then it's really hard to know if what is being done is helping, or if anything actually is being done. There's also a commitment to revisit the Eastern Basin targets. So that wasn't included in the official plan in terms of how they were going to address the Cladophora algae issue in the eastern end of the lake. And there was a commitment to revisit that and see if they could set a target this year. So we'll be also watching out for that. And then on the residential end, you know, maintaining septic systems, picking up after your pets, et cetera, sort of common solutions. Naturalizing shorelines, if you have shoreline property, all really helps as well. And I jump into Lake Erie Guardians now. So the work of the Lake Erie Guardians is really focused on so a few different areas. Sort of started with the algae issue, and slowly we're kind of broadening into other areas. But Guardians are essentially businesses, citizens who have come together to help protect Lake Erie. And there's sort of 4 key areas that I'm going to outline in terms of the work they're doing. One is advancing policy. Another big piece is public education and engagement, the Great Lakes Business Network, and then the green infrastructure piece is just a new piece that we're just kind of starting off with, starting out under the Great Lakes Business Network. So as I mentioned on the policy piece, we've been doing this through petitions, letters, meetings with elected officials, town hall meetings. So when the initial plan was being developed in 2017, we actually held town hall meetings because the governments weren't doing that to consult citizens and get that input and get the information flowing both ways in terms of what was being planned. And we're actually thinking of maybe hosting a few virtual town halls. As I mentioned already, the work plans are almost 2 years overdue now, and Eastern Basin targets are the other piece we're really pushing this year. The other piece around Lake Erie Guardians is the public engagement piece. And these are some photos from the Lake Erie Challenge last year. So we just had our 3rd one this year. This is an initiative that was started by a few athletes who were interested in getting involved. And we went back and forth, and we started with some swimmers, and they knew how to swim, and that's what they wanted to do. And so The first year saw 4 swimmers do a 24-hour swim at various points along Lake Erie to raise awareness, to talk to the media, to talk about the issues and why they care about Lake Erie. These are some photos from last year where we actually had some festivities at the Port Dover beach as we waited for the stand-up paddleboarders and swimmers to come in. And then this past year, we added some, because of COVID, it was slightly different, but we weren't able to do the on-land portion in terms of festivities, but we were able to still get the athletes out there and swimming, kayaking, and stand-up paddleboarding, and got some great media coverage about the issues and why they care about Lake Erie. This is some water sampling work we were doing in partnership with the water rangers. One of the photos is from Great Lake, Great Art for the Great Lakes, and they came out and did some artwork around the Great Lakes, and then litter cleanups. The other piece that we were trying to do is really get people out to who don't consider themselves as environmentalists or very outdoorsy, to kind of experience the waterways a little bit more and kind of make and solidify that connection a little bit more, to see if that'll help them sort of care for the watershed a bit more. And so last year we ran a series of sessions in the London area. A couple of them were like this one here, canoeing on the Thames. And so we had expert paddling guides go out with Dr. Adam Yates from the University of Western, who's a river ecologist and really engaging speaker, and kind of team them up to actually do some guided canoe trips to get people learning both the skill, but also the amazing place that the Thames River can be. Did an edible and medicinal plants tour with Dr. Andrew Young, I believe. Should have put a note in my notes here. And again, this was along the Thames River, highlighting some of the edible plants and history of the Thames River and the food sources that are actually available and were available in their different uses. And then we also did a learn to open water swim event on Lake Erie. This year with COVID, we've had to kind of shift. And so folks have been working on the Lake Erie, Antler River race, which actually happens tomorrow. And this is anywhere around along the Antler or Thames River, as we know it often. And it's a sort of it's essentially a scavenger hunt activity where people are able to go out, learn a bit about the river, and also do something fun as a way to sort of explore the Thames River in these COVID times. We also held a series of freshwater trivia nights in the spring, and we'll probably do that again starting up in the fall. We took the summer off, but again, another way to sort of get some knowledge out there in a fun way and try to do it in a way that's safe and socially distanced. And then the Great Lakes Business Network, speak briefly to this. This is a network that started in the US a couple of years ago around the Line 5 pipeline under the Straits of Mackinac on Lake Michigan. And then over the last couple of years, we've been exploring how to sort of grow that network, both in terms of issues that they work on, but also looking at how we can sort of involve more Ontario businesses in some of that work, so that there's sort of that a bigger group of businesses kind of working on it. And we've been working, as I said, with sort of businesses who've been working with the Lake Erie Guardians. And so this was a natural fit for us. And so the Great Lakes Business is a network of businesses who are working both from the advocacy perspective, primarily at this point, but advocating on the nutrients, Lake Erie algae nutrients issue, as well as Line 5, and then green energy and invasive Asian carp is the other area that the network is working on. And so we're offering some support there to work with them and build the network in Ontario, so that we can also take advantage of some of the common learnings that the businesses can kind of do together. And this is a photo, as I mentioned, from the 1960s. I don't have an exact year here, where people were actually, Lake Erie was being declared dead, and there were citizens out protesting, far better dressed than we often are now, but demanding action. And that is really what got things turned around. And so we really firmly believe that that's the level, that there is a real place for that level of engagement and actually getting out there and demanding action, and that need for citizen involvement. It can't be just the NGOs or the environmentalists or the scientists. It's gonna need all of us to actually save Lake Erie. And on that note, I'll leave it there, so we have a few minutes here for any conversation, comments. Megan, are you going to help facilitate this? And I'm assuming she's here, but we'll just jump in. So if anyone has, just reading through some of the comments in the chat box now, if there's any questions, certainly feel free to pop in there and type it in there, or you can unmute your mic, and happy to expand on any of the pieces I spoke about, or perhaps even skipped because I went through them rather quickly. So Morgan's got a comment in there about, I've been going to Port Burwell since 1998 and was married on the North Shore of Lake Erie. Yes. Yes, in terms of, and then Vince made a comment about the farming industry being very intensive in the region and fertilizers likely to blame. That is a big area of concern. As I mentioned, 75% of the watershed is in farmland. And so when you talk about non-point source, that's the primary area where the estimates are anywhere from 85 to 90% of the nutrients that are causing the issue in Lake Erie are coming from non-point sources, and a majority of that is agricultural land. And so fertilizers, manure is included in that fertilizer category, and that's where it's really important. There's really important need for nutrient management and controls on manure as well, and not having them be spread on in the wintertime when it's actually not doing any good for anyone. And then also a key area of that I didn't have a chance to really talk about in this presentation is that certainly, there's sort of the Canadian side of what's happening here, and then agriculture is even more intensive on the US side of the lake. And that actually is a big issue as well in terms of all the agriculture around the Maumee River that's putting inputs and nutrient inputs. And they've got major intensive hog farming. It's creating a lot of manure, and that's a big issue. So Morgan's asking if farmers were given rebates for the environmental service they would provide more. And I think that's a good point, Morgan. I know there's the Alternative Land Use Services team that is working on that exact thing in terms of trying to get farmers who are perhaps have some more marginal land or an area of land that's kind of like wetter, that isn't as productive, and so are sometimes make good candidates for kind of going, okay, let's restore this as a wetland or as a buffer strip, and it can then paying the farmers for that service, that ecosystem service that land is providing. So it's taken out of production, and then it's sort of being restored to that kind of system. And I'm assuming everyone else can see everyone's comments as well, so I won't try to read through every single one of these. Yeah, in terms of acting rationally given environmental rebates, I mean, I think it's a tricky, that's a whole other conversation we could go on for. There's benefits, and then there's I know where situations where there might be buffer strips and that were like areas along ditches and stuff that were planted in trees when crop prices are down. And so it seems useful to actually take the rebates and plant trees. But then once crop prices go up, back up, and it's more profitable to farm that land, then those buffer strips get taken out, and trees get taken out. And so I think that's a really good point in terms of ensuring when those programs are designing them for the long term. And I think this is a conversation that Alice has been having too, where it's like you need to be able to pay for those ecosystem services beyond sort of like, 4 or 5 years. How do you do it so that it's done in a way that's going to ensure all the effort that goes in doesn't just get taken out in a few years down the line. Oh, that's great to see. Mike's got a action campaign going for Great Lakes. I'll check that out for sure. So what safety measures are put in place now if toxic algae would threaten drinking water as it did in the past? That's a really good question. I know Toledo, Ohio is saying that it will never happen again in terms of they're now knowing they're monitoring it more closely and know what to do. In terms of the technical aspects of that, I'm not quite sure. And similarly, the challenge around Pelee Island is that there was the municipal supply, but then there's also private wells that are so private intakes into the lake as well. And so how you sort of account for both the public and private, I think that would then also fall under some private owners to actually figure out what to do as well. And I'm not as well versed on exactly the technical aspects of that. I know the upgrades are very resource intensive in terms of money. So it's not cheap to modify your system to always be able to address toxic algae. And so I think that's a key investment area. If that's the route you were thinking, okay, let's just invest in better filtration or whatever to deal with it. And then, as I was mentioning, the Chlamydophora on the east end, it's a different type of algae. And so what it's doing is though it might not be producing the same kind of neurotoxins or liver toxins, it actually does really clog up the intakes, and then you're having to go out there and clean those off and shut down the drinking water. I know anglers complain about it as well, and boaters. Any comment on the effect of record heat on water temperature of Lake Erie this summer? Yes, so it's a question from Gord. I think, all the lakes were a lot warmer this year. And in terms of the algae blooms, and I'll speak specifically to that, there's all kinds of other impacts that I'm sure it's had. But in terms of the algae itself, there's sort of a couple of conditions that you need. One is you need a good sort of base flow of like new phosphorus waiting there so that when the algae start growing, there's a nice big rich food source. And then the other is the heat that kind of helps them, gives them a nice comfy environment. And so you really do need sort of to some extent both of those pieces. And so I think what happened this year is we didn't actually get as much. We had there's a drier spring than last year. So the key timeline is usually sort of from February to end of June in terms of when the phosphorus needs to get into the water to be there ready for the algae. And so because it was a drier spring and there wasn't as much input of phosphorus, even though we had the warmer temperatures in Lake Erie, it actually didn't lead to a really bad algae year. So I think the prediction is it's probably going to be about a 4 or 4.5 on a 10-point scale this year is the prediction, and we'll find out in sometime in October when the scientists at NOAA sort of put out their results on their analysis for this year. I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to look through a couple of more of these, if that's all right, Megan, or if you want to boot everyone out.
No, that's okay. I just apologies I couldn't come on to help you with question and answers. Of course, my internet went down, but that's just what we have to deal with here in this digital age. The session is officially over and networking has started, but you're welcome to stay here right until 3:45 when our closing ceremonies start. So it's up to you, Raj, if you want to answer a few more questions, you can go ahead and then just leave the session just before 3:45 to join us on the main stage for closing ceremonies and a concert with Shane Phillips. I'll just put that out there now, but you're welcome to continue. Thank you so much. This has been so informative. I see the questions rolling in, and I'm wondering all of the same things myself too. Wonderful questions, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing and the information.
Well, thank you for putting this on. I'll just see if there's any more that I can answer quickly, and otherwise I might have to get back to some people offline. I don't know if there's going to be any sharing of email addresses or such, but certainly I'm just Raj at freshwateralliance.ca and happy to jump in. There's some more detailed questions. As I said, I don't really know the exact ways that the Toledo water treatment plant dealt with dealing with the toxins now. And so I know one area is that they say they're better at testing, but in terms of actually mitigating toxins, if they are found, I'd have to look into that a bit more. And again, in terms of advisories on eating fish in lake, in terms of viable commercial fishery, the fishery is still at this point very, very viable. It's got a huge commercial fishery, and then also a recreational fishery, especially on the US side of Lake Erie. And so that's still going strong. I think the challenges in terms of advisory, so when I used to go across the border at the Detroit border, and people would ask, because what are you doing here? Why do you want to enter the U.S.? And the first question often they ask is the fish safe to eat? And I think it's a tricky question at the moment. I think respecting current advisories is fairly safe. There have been impacts in some of the fish organ meats that have been found from the toxins, and so there have been toxins, I believe, found in organ meat, but not in the flesh. I think it's an area that needs a lot more research, and I don't know if there's a lot more research that's been done yet on that. So I don't think it's a huge concern at this point. And yes, there actually is the commercial fishery is doing fairly well, as is the recreational one. But I think the challenge was certainly with both is if there's a bloom in a particular area, then those anglers need to be able to access a different area for fish because the fish aren't there, or if the fish start dying off, then that's a concern. And then thirdly, there's also public health concern, right? So people are going to be cautious if there's recurring toxic algae in the waters. And so I know the anglers are worried about that, and we're working with them in terms of kind of going, okay, how do we ensure that, the toxic algae isn't there and we don't have these massive algae blooms so that the fishery remains viable. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're some good more comments about, yes, eating fish and port over perch. And yes, Gord, in terms of Great Lake tributary streams have been really low water levels this summer because of the heat and the long-term impacts. I think that's a legitimate concern. Again, I'm probably not the best person to speak to that on this presentation, but certainly happy to, if you have more information to share, to get that information out, or conversely to look into it a little bit more and get some answers for you if that's what you're looking for. All right, thank you, everyone. I think I may see you over in the networking room in a few minutes, and otherwise have a happy and awesome last few nice, sunny, warm days of the summer, I guess fall now, and we'll see you later. Bye.